Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about how Nintendo could have forgotten about some of these incredible franchises that we've enjoyed over the years, but in recent times haven't seen any new mainline entries. What's going on? Well, that's what I'd like to talk more about today. But before going forward, let me ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. So Nintendo has many different franchises that are currently active. Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda, Pokemon, Kirby, Animal Crossing, Splatoon, the list goes on. But there are certain series we haven't seen a new mainline entry for in an extremely long time. There were certain series that were pretty frequent and consistent, but now are no more. What's the deal here? Well, I find it interesting when we take a look at the original Super Smash Bros. 64 roster. I think looking at this original roster is very telling on how things have changed. You take a look at it. Luigi? Sure, we got the Luigi's Mansion series, that's doing pretty well. Mario, I don't even think I really need to speak on him. Donkey Kong, on the other hand, is a curious one. We do have a couple remasters in Tropical Freeze and the upcoming Country Returns HD, and there was also the remake of Mario vs. Donkey Kong, which is more so a Mario game than a Donkey Kong game, but still, at least Donkey Kong is being featured in some releases on Nintendo Switch, but no brand new games. As for Link, well, that one's also obvious. There are several new Zelda games and remasters and remakes. Samus, actually, that one is doing pretty well too. Metroid, we have Metroid Dread, we have Metroid Prime Remastered, and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is coming out next year, so Samus has been pretty active during the Switch generation. Captain Falcon, on the other hand, kind of. We do have F-Zero 99, but that's not totally a new game. It's a little bit of a weird situation. When are we going to see a totally brand new entry to the F-Zero series? We are not sure. Taking a look at Ness was just in Earthbound, and we haven't seen any new Earthbound games in many generations. And we may never see another Earthbound game, so that one's also kind of interesting. Yoshi, we had a new game for Yoshi, we've had multiple new games for Kirby. Fox, as in Star Fox, well, there's been no new Star Fox during the Switch era, which I do find to be odd, considering the Switch era has been one of the longest generations ever, and all sorts of Nintendo IP have seen record highs. Yet Nintendo has failed to take advantage of this opportunity to put Star Fox out there when it's underperformed so many times in the past. But maybe that's why. And then of course Pikachu and Jigglypuff are from Pokemon, and Pokemon has done so well on the Nintendo Switch, they are pretty active. But looking at this roster, Donkey Kong, Captain Falcon, Ness, and Star Fox, what's going on with these particular series? They've been inactive basically. I think a lot of this does have to do with the changing of the times. The Nintendo of the 90s isn't the Nintendo of today. There were multiple Donkey Kong games for the Super Nintendo, F-Zero had its start on Super Nintendo as did Star Fox, and Ness from Earthbound was the second game of the series on the Super Nintendo. But then on the Nintendo 64, we still had Donkey Kong, we had an F-Zero, and we had Star Fox 64. There were the plans to make Mother 3 or Earthbound 2, but that was cancelled and changed and eventually came out in only Japan in Mother 3 for the Game Boy Advance. On Nintendo GameCube, Donkey Kong had multiple games. There was Jungle Beat and then the Donkey Konga series. F-Zero had multiple Game Boy Advance games, and there was F-Zero GX. And Star Fox had two awesome games in Star Fox Adventures and Star Fox Assault. But once we moved on to the Nintendo Wii, there was a shift in Nintendo's strategy. Nintendo was continually seeing declining sales for their home consoles. And so with the Wii, Nintendo started to adopt the Blue Ocean strategy, where they weren't directly competing with their competitors, PlayStation and Xbox. Instead of creating a significantly more powerful console, they only created a marginally more powerful console and focused on innovation with motion controls, and this move led to the Nintendo Wii selling over 100 million copies, reversing Nintendo's trajectory. And throughout this generation, Nintendo made many games that focused on reaching a more casual audience, not appealing to as many hardcore gamers, and implementing controls that made things easier for a wider audience. And so for the typical core Nintendo gamer, you can make the argument that we were heading in a direction of watered down series. Now, there were still many Nintendo series that were active on the Nintendo Wii like Mario, Zelda, and Kirby, but what you noticed, there wasn't a new Star Fox game. There wasn't a new F-Zero game. There was Donkey Kong though, we had Donkey Kong Country Returns. But I do think overall there was a shift here. Nintendo started to prioritize games that they knew were going to sell a lot and wouldn't cost them as much money. And even today, Nintendo operates in this way. It's one of the reasons why Nintendo isn't suffering the same way as the rest of the industry. They've slowed down on increasing development costs by not creating as much powerful hardware, but they've also been very selective on the kind of products they decide to do. If they are going to invest a pretty huge budget, it's going to be something they know is going to do extremely well. And if they're going to revisit a series, it's going to be done in a way that isn't extremely expensive. You look at F-Zero 99, that was not an expensive project. And I would like to say that Nintendo is bringing back some of their older franchises. This year we got Endless Ocean Luminous, we're getting MEO for Famicom Detective Club. Nintendo is bringing back some of their older IP, but if you look at these projects, they're not big budget efforts. So even if they're not extremely successful, there isn't really that much of a loss, there isn't a high risk. But you look at things like a brand new F-Zero, a brand new Donkey Kong, a brand new Star Fox, in order to do these series, Nintendo would probably have to invest a more significant budget to do them right, unless they're doing something that's a little unusual, like in the case of F-Zero 99. But does this mean that Nintendo will never take a risk, that they will never try and bring back some of these franchises in a more significant way? I don't really think that's the case. I just think Nintendo is selective, and they will have their chance, but they want to make sure they do it right. You look at a series like Pikmin. I would put Pikmin on a similar level as Star Fox or F-Zero, and they took their time with Pikmin 4. First, they provided Pikmin 3 Deluxe. We saw Pikmin throughout the Nintendo Park. We saw the mobile game Pikmin Bloom, and these things amounted to the release of Pikmin 4, which they took a very long time to make, but they made sure it was as good as possible, and now Pikmin 4 is the best-selling game in the series and growing. And so from a financial perspective, I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo's going to be more gung-ho about making Pikmin 5 and not taking as many years or generations to put it out there. And I actually think for both Donkey Kong and F-Zero, they are doing a similar kind of build-up here. In the case of Donkey Kong, the first expansion to Super Nintendo World is about Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong has a huge role in the Super Mario movie. And throughout the Switch era, we've gone Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, and now we're getting Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, but then there was also the Donkey Kong expansion DLC to Mario + Rabbids Kingdom Battle. So it isn't like Donkey Kong is totally forgotten here, and I think that there is a little bit of a build-up which will ultimately amount to a brand new Donkey Kong game, most likely for Nintendo Switch 2, within the next couple years, I'm willing to bet. And now to a smaller degree, I think something like this is also happening with F-Zero. You see, Captain Falcon is a popular choice of characters to feature in the different Smash Bros. Reveal trailers, but perhaps even more importantly, we do have F-Zero 99, which is a game that's free for all NSO members. It's something that's reaching a larger audience, and I think this is by design. I think they want to get F-Zero out there and remind people that this is a Nintendo franchise, so when they do eventually revisit F-Zero with something a bit more ambitious, it will happen. I do recognize that years ago, Miyamoto said something along the lines of us not expecting an F-Zero anytime soon. Actually, I have the quote right here. I certainly understand that people want a new F-Zero game. I think where I struggle is that I don't really have a good idea for what's new that we could bring to F-Zero that could really turn it into a great game again. And when I read that, what I think is, yes, they care about F-Zero, but they are trying to be smart and selective about how they go about bringing back F-Zero, because they can't just invest a whole bunch of money on a project that they are not sure is going to work. So they'll do things like an F-Zero 99, and maybe eventually they'll also do something like an F-Zero GX remaster, which wouldn't be as resource intensive, and if that also does well, that sets them up to bring out a proper new F-Zero game that could reach a larger audience. But who would make a new F-Zero game? Who would make a new Star Fox game or a new Donkey Kong game? There's certainly debate to be had there. There are several different EPD groups. Nintendo has multiple teams even outside of EPD. But something I thought that was worth bringing up is something that was said by Christopher Dring, a known industry insider, in this article from GameIndustry.biz. I also know that Nintendo is actively meeting with independent developers to find new partners. Some of that is around publishing indie games, which Nintendo does from time to time, but it's also seeking studios that could work on some of its IP. Nintendo regularly works with third-party teams including Bandai Namco, Team Ninja, Platinum Games, Mercury Steam, WayForward, and Grezzo. But the company is looking to add to that roster, and I know of 3 studios that are in deep conversation around making games based on Nintendo brands. So what's super interesting about this is that 1, Christopher Dring is highlighting how Nintendo already has multiple third-party partners that they can work with to bring back some of their IP, but also there are 3 new studios that he's heard about that they're in conversations with to do this as well. Could some of these studios be the studios that will help to bring back some of these forgotten Nintendo IP? I absolutely think so. While we may not have seen every single Nintendo franchise see a comeback during the Switch era, we've seen many. But something Nintendo has also spoken of in the past is that with increasing development costs, they're going to need to find different ways to maintain that stream of content. Games are going to take longer to make, but Nintendo will want to find other ways to keep that flow going, so how do you do that? Remakes and remasters will certainly help, but also partnering with different studios and perhaps diving into some of your other lesser used IP. It can't just be Mario, Zelda, and Splatoon every year, they're going to have to mix and match a little bit. And so things like Xenoblade, Metroid, Fire Emblem will certainly help to fill up the roster, as they've done, but Nintendo has even more they can bring to the table, like Star Fox, Donkey Kong, and F-Zero. So I'm actually thinking during the Switch 2 era, we're going to see an even better pattern of release for Nintendo. While we'll still see remakes and remasters and we're still going to see the big staples, I think more often, we're going to see Nintendo bring back some of their other IP, because I think their infrastructure is evolving and improving, and it's going to facilitate this. And there is this part of me that kind of thinks that Star Fox might be around the corner. Now, is there any significant evidence for this? There's a little bit. So there's this one article from VGC last year where a Star Fox programmer, one of the original programmers, Dylan Cuthbert, said that he's sure the series will return. Now, that isn't necessarily saying much. I don't think he'd be working on the new Star Fox project. I think it simply speaks to the idea that Nintendo likely will come back to Star Fox. It's not like it's totally forgotten, it's just they're taking their time to find the right opportunity to go back at it again. You see, they kinda tried it with Star Fox Zero during the Wii U, but I just don't think they went at it in the right way. 1, the Wii U wasn't exactly a healthy platform to make a big push for a game like this, but also 2, Star Fox Zero was kind of a low budget effort. Visually, it didn't really look like that much of a modern game. It almost looked like they were remastering an N64 game as opposed to building up a new Star Fox from scratch. It lacked multiplayer in an online mode, and the controls were divisive to say the least. Star Fox Zero wasn't the right way to bring back Star Fox. Of course, they tried it from a marketing perspective. They had that cool animated skit they put together, they had the robot chicken dolls, they had things to market Star Fox, but fact of the matter is, during that period of time, Nintendo was not doing well, and the actual game itself wasn't the game we needed. But during this period of time, Nintendo marketing is pretty good, people buy games on the Switch unlike the Wii U, and a proper Star Fox entry I do think would do really well. Now at this stage of the game I don't think it would come to Nintendo Switch, I think it would be for Switch 2, but it wouldn't be totally surprised if we see a Star Fox remaster first. There have been Bandai Namco listings that could be hinting at something like this. It might be for Kid Icarus, but it could also be for Star Fox. And so maybe we see like a Star Fox Assault remaster before we see a proper new entry. This is a possibility. Now, something I think is worth pointing out is that there's this interesting rumor from V Scooper. V Scooper provides scoops on upcoming movies, leaks and rumors of that kind, and here they said in response to this person about talking about a Donkey Kong Country movie, yes, but I also heard that Nintendo part didn't seem too convinced, but we'll see. Star Fox and other Mario projects besides that are the priorities. So here V Scooper's talking about Nintendo seems to be working on something Star Fox related to be viewed, like a movie or a show or something of that kind. And if Nintendo's going to be creating some sort of Star Fox project in this way, then I would have to think this would be followed up by a game or vice versa. So it's a rumor, take it with a grain of salt, but It's interesting if true. And really, like F-Zero, I think Nintendo's just waiting for the right time, the right space to put out Star Fox. So basically, I think Star Fox, F-Zero, and Donkey Kong are for sure coming back and are going to have new entries during the Switch 2 era. Let's call it a prediction. Each one will have at least one new entry during the next generation. But when it comes to Earthbound, it's a little different. So during this IGN interview with Shigesato Itoi, the creator of Earthbound, he said this: "Usually when I'm done with something, I'm done with it for good. You can't give up on projects you're in the middle of, but when you put an end to something, it's best to just leave it alone. The older you get, the more stories there are for you." And so essentially, this is just another example of Shigesato Itoi basically telling us that the Earthbound story is done and he doesn't feel like going back to it. That said, in this year of 2024, it is the 30th anniversary of Mother 2, Earthbound, and there have been little different things that they have been doing to celebrate Earthbound. And there has been some speculation that this could all culminate in an announcement for maybe a remake of Earthbound, Mother 2. And I think when we're talking about remakes, it's a different conversation. It's one thing to say that Itoi won't be behind a new Earthbound game like Mother 4, but since the stories already exist, the idea of simply remaking them and retelling them to a newer audience, I think is fair game. And if Nintendo were to remake Earthbound, then I could easily see that opening the door for a remake of Earthbound Beginnings, Mother 1, and yes, a version of Mother 3 or Earthbound 2 in other places outside of Japan. And I'm not just talking about a localized version of the Game Boy Advance game, but a proper new remake. I think something like this could happen down the road. As for a brand new title, I think it's unlikely because the creator doesn't want to continue it, but Nintendo themselves might want to, and so it may be possible if these games are remade and they are successful. But for now, let's just stay optimistic that maybe we'll see an Earthbound remake at some point down the road, and then maybe we'll see a follow-up for the other Earthbound games. And so going back to the main premise of the video, how could Nintendo have forgotten about these Nintendo IP? I don't think it's so much that they've forgotten per se, but I do think they intentionally took a step back from these IP during the transition from GameCube to Wii, and they've just tried to be more selective in thinking about the right opportunities to bring these games back. But as Nintendo's becoming more successful from this Switch era, and is continually streamlining their development process and building up their partners, I think we're looking at a future where we could start to see more consistent releases for a lot of different Nintendo IP outside of the typical ones. So I think the future is bright, and I expect to see some sort of return to all of these games in some way down the road. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.